if you were to ask a normal person how bodybuilders are actually judged at bodybuilding shows, they would either tell you that they have no clue, or they would basically tell you that it is pretty much the biggest guy that wins the show. Well, in this video, I will try to go in depth and examine how bodybuilding shows are actually judged. Because for us that are bodybuilding geeks, it might seem quite obvious, but for most normal people, they have no idea how bodybuilders are placed from first to last, considering that for them, all bodybuilders look huge, massive, ripped, and shredded. So, without further ado, let's get straight into it, starting off with mass. Now, mass is very important when it comes to judging a bodybuilding physique, and mass can pretty much be broken down into four factors. That would be size, muscle insertions and shape, completeness, and structure. And I will go further in depth when it comes to those four factors, starting off with size. Now, this one is pretty much a factor that everyone can understand. We can see Big Ramy here on the left being bigger than Phil Heath on the right. Moving on to muscle insertions and shape. If we take a look at these two gentlemen's back, this is Dennis Wolf on the right and Kai Green on the left, we can see that when it comes to the lat muscles, Mr. Kai Green, he has a longer lat muscles, meaning that he also has lower lat insertions because they insert lower on his back in comparison to Dennis Wolf with shorter lat insertions that insert higher on his back, meaning that he has higher lat insertions. This is obviously a disadvantage because it sort of looks like he's missing muscle in this area right here in comparison to Kai Green, who is not missing muscle in this area right here. But are longer muscle insertions always a good thing? Well, yes, they are, except for the biceps. Obviously, here in the crab most muscular, as this pose is called, this man right here, he has shorter biceps. So you can see that there's a gap between his biceps and his forearms. Meanwhile, this man on the left, Phil Heath, he has longer biceps. No gap between his biceps and his forearms. When it comes to the crab most muscular, this pose that you're looking at, having longer bicep insertions is pretty much always a good thing. But the same cannot be said for this pose right here, the frontable biceps, because as you can see, the shorter biceps that this man right here has, Kai Green, it creates for a more impressive peak, I guess you could say. It looks more like a mountain. Meanwhile, this man right here, Phil Heath, he has flatter looking biceps. Obviously, Phil Heath still has better arms, but that is because of his triceps right here and his forearms. That is a whole nother thing, but if you just take a look at their biceps, some would argue that this is more impressive, some would argue that this is more impressive, but I just wanted to also give an example of how longer muscle insertions are not always better, but usually that is the case, except when you're talking about the biceps. But let us move on to pretty much completeness. If you take a look at this man right here, he is named Brandon Curry. You can see that his upper body is absolutely amazing from a bodybuilding perspective, but from a bodybuilding perspective, his legs, also known as the wheels, they are quite slim, quite small. So this man has what you would call a disproportionate physique. What does a proportionate physique mean? Well, it means that your upper body pretty much matches your lower body, and this is not the case here because his upper body is too big for his lower body, meaning that he is upper body dominant. Obviously, some bodybuilders are also lower body dominant, and that is not good as well. So that is what we mean when we're talking about proportions. What about symmetry? Well, when it came to proportion, it was how proportionate your upper body is in comparison to your lower body. When it comes to symmetry, it is pretty much how your left side is looking in comparison to your right side. And this gentleman right here, Dorian Yates, even though he was a great bodybuilder, he never had the best biceps, but he tore his biceps at a point in his career, and from that point on, his left bicep looked just a lot weirder and smaller in comparison to his right biceps. You can even see that his left biceps look like they have sort of a shorter muscle insertion in comparison to his right biceps. So his biceps are what you would call asymmetrical. Finally, we move on to structure. What does a good structure entail in bodybuilding? Well, back in the day, it would pretty much mean having width upstairs, having a good shoulder width, and also having a small waist. This man right here is named Brian Buchanan, and he has an absolutely amazing structure when it comes to those two factors. But in today's bodybuilding, having a small waistline is not that important, of course, unless you're talking about classic physique. But in this case, we're talking about open bodybuilding, but being wide is important. So as you can see, both of these gentlemen right here, they are two examples of what it means to have a wide structure, because they both are wide when it comes to the shoulder area, if that makes sense. They are wide upstairs. That creates a more imposing physique, especially when you compare them to other guys. Now, of course, having a small waistline, even in today's bodybuilding game, it does not hurt, but it isn't as important as it was pretty much in the 90s and prior to that. Now, structure is also about height. Some people might wonder why most successful bodybuilders are short. Well, here you have Morgan Asti. I don't remember exactly what his height is, something like 6'3", 6'4". And as you can see, he looks quite small, even though he is really, really heavy. I believe that he is over 300 pounds on stage. But because he is so tall, meaning that he's quite long, he does not look as big as the other guys, even though he has the same amount of muscle or even more packed on his physique. But moving on to these two gentlemen right here, this is basically the final example I have when it comes to showcasing what structure entails in bodybuilding. Here you can see two gentlemen who look like they are both quite good. They are both ripped and they are both muscular. But if you look at their shoulder width, this man right here, Ian Valliere, he is much wider than this man right here, named James Hollingshead. So in this pose called the front lat spread, where pretty much width is very important, I would say that this man right here would obviously lose the shot, because this man right here, Ian Valliere, he is just much wider. So this is basically why structure and especially width is important in bodybuilding. So that was basically it when it comes to mass. Now we move on to conditioning. Now, conditioning basically boils down to lacking fat and water, and you can further break it down into three factors: muscle separation and detail, striations, and graininess. Starting off with muscle separation and detail, we can look at these two physiques right here. On the right, we have Branch Warren, and on the left, we have Phil Heath. Now, if you look at their backs, you can see that Phil Heath's back is a lot more impressive, because he has more muscle separation and detail. His back right here looks a bit washed out. Meanwhile, Phil Heath has more detail and muscle separation. For example, you can look at his traps, clearly separated from the rest of his physique. Meanwhile, between his traps and the rest of his back, there doesn't look to be clear lines separating it. So overall, Phil Heath is a lot more impressive in terms of muscle separation and detail, at least from the back. Moving on to striations, here we have Andreas Munzer, also known as the most shredded man in history. And striations are basically individual muscle fibers that you can see pretty much firing across a muscle group. You can see that this guy has a striated chest. You can see he has striated delts. You see striations here. You can even see some striations in his quads. He even had freaking striations in his back, but we won't see that in this video right here. But another thing that I wanted to cover would be striated glutes. Now, if you guys are wondering why I am showing you guys a man's butt, it is because in today's bodybuilding, having a set of striated glutes is really important. This man right here, by the way, is Flex Lewis. Why is that important? Well, because it is often said that pretty much the glutes are the last line of defense when it comes to fat and water. So if you are able to showcase striations in your glutes, that means that you are really impressive when it comes to your conditioning. Finally, moving on to graininess. What does graininess looks? Well, it pretty much means that your skin sort of looks like a asphalt road. What does that mean in practice? Well, I will show you guys 3 examples. First of all, we have this man again, Branch Warren, and even though he has sort of poor muscle separation and detail, he has amazing graininess. As you can see, when it comes to his legs, especially where the light hits his legs, you can see that asphalt road looking skin. The same can be said for this man right here, Dexter Jackson, but this man might be the grainiest of them all. This is Morgan Asti, the tall bodybuilder that I talked about earlier on in this video, and you can see all graininess all throughout his physique basically. So there you have it. Bodybuilding judging is basically a combination of judging conditioning and mass. But let us see how it is done in practice. Well, here we have on the right Rolly Winkler, and here on the left we have Hadi Choopan. Now, what do you guys notice about these two physiques? Well, first of all, when it comes to the mass, this man right here, he has more mass, obviously. But Hadi Choopan is not far behind. But when it comes to the conditioning, this man is a lot more conditioned than Rolly Winkler. Meaning that if we put those two factors together, this guy has an edge when it comes to the mass. But it is only a slight edge. This guy has a huge edge when it comes to the conditioning. For example, we can notice in their legs, you can see that there are a lot more detail and muscle separation in Hadi Choopan's legs. You can even see some striations here in his quads. Meanwhile, downstairs in the legs, this guy right here, Rolly Winkler, he looks a bit soft. The same can be said about his midsection. So overall, you would easily give it to Hadi Choopan. How about between these two gentlemen? First of all, we can notice that we see striations in both of their glutes. So when it comes to the conditioning, it is not that far off, but still Phil Heath has somewhat better conditioning. One way that you can tell that is that he has more detail here, muscle separation and things of that nature in his hamstrings. You can also see more detail and muscle separation in his back and in his arms, especially when it comes to his triceps. You can even see some striations in his triceps. But other than that, when it comes to the mass game, yes, Big Ramy, he is indeed wider, but he is lacking sorely when it comes to the lat insertions. You can see that Big Ramy has quite high lat insertions. Meanwhile, Phil Heath has, in comparison to Big Ramy, lower lat insertion. So when it comes to this area right here, Big Ramy is lacking. Meanwhile, Phil Heath is not lacking in the back department. So there you go. One final example would be Dexter the Blade Jackson versus Steve Kuclo, who would win between these two gentlemen right here. First of all, again, we can see that I guess most people would give it to Steve Kuclo, most normal people that would be, because Steve Kuclo obviously is bigger than Dexter Jackson. But if we take a close look, guys, we can see that Dexter Jackson has some features that Steve Kuclo sorely lacks. First of all, looking at their midsection, more detail, muscle separation, things of that nature in the midsection for Dexter Blade Jackson. When you take a look at their legs, you can see the line going across Dexter the Blade Jackson side leg, separating his hamstring right here from his quads. That leg is not that evident when it comes to Steve Kuclo. Dexter the Blade Jackson, he was also known for having some sick quads from the side. You can see sort of some slight striations in his quads from the side. None of that is visible in Steve Kuclo. And also when you take a look at their arms and delts, you can see more separation in Dexter the Blade Jackson in comparison to Steve Kuclo. The same can be said also when it comes to the separation from the Dells and their traps. So overall, it is pretty easy to say that Dexter Jackson would take this pose. That was basically it for this video. I hope you guys learned a thing or two about bodybuilding judging. And also for the new guys out there, I hope you guys have a better understanding of how bodybuilding shows are actually judged. There you go, guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I love you, ladies and gentlemen, and I will see you later.